Chapter 2, Language and Meaning. Sitting in the grass and the leaves, noticing the brown, orange, red, and green around you, you are enjoying nature while taking in philosophy from your textbook, which states that a subject is an observer and an object is a thing observed. So you begin to wonder what it is to be an observer. Just for a moment, you slipping into a kind of trance state as you look upon the fall colors. An observer of the object, the leaf, tree bark, light blue sky, and brilliant sunlight, is what you are. And these shape the way you think and feel. It becomes apparent to you that reality is not somewhere other than where you are in nature, or closed off in your room where you see all four walls and notice the angles of each corner in your room. In your room, though, is the ultimate subject experience, that of the interaction you have with your gaming console. You allow yourself to go headlong into a subject position, through which you notice the object of your desire, the ideal object. So where is your real subjective world? Is it out in the fall? Is it being the subject in a reality you do not even have tangible truth about, and of which you have no connection with your senses? The primal nature of the subject of your experience has been shunted or pushed away from its real experience as the, quote, I that you are really about. There is a decay you feel about your subject, yet you continue to play the games. The same goes for the movies you get absorbed in and your favorite television shows. There is a connection between you and your objective world, even though you cannot touch or feel it. A sparrow flutters by, and you are startled out of your daydreaming and wandering. There you sit, in the grass and leaves. Subjectivity is the internal state of being through which assertions are made about real experiences of causation, which can be exerted via the sense of self. Subjectivity involves the person's tastes, agency, efficacy, and their conscious and unconscious worlds. Subjectivity is the presentation of oneself to oneself and to the world, as conceived by the individual and the audience. It is a sharing of something that is experienced as firm and not changing, and yet it is flexible and fluid. This subjectivity, a psychological state synchronous with the external world, is a persistent understanding one must produce in order to be taken as a serious part of others' worlds as well. In Western thought, the subject has been understood over and against the object, and the subject has had primacy in the relationship. In the 20th century, the nature of the subject came into question with the advent of deconstructionism through the work of Jacques Derrida and Martin Heidegger. I refer to the subject as fragile and not necessarily having primacy over the object. This understanding of subjectivity and the subject is foundational to the development of fusion as the way media act upon the subject. The work of Lacan lends perspective about subjective experience to the development of the interaction between the individual and media. Lacan does not identify subjectivity as an active process, but as rather an impersonal and passive one. Such a way of thinking enhances the notion of fusion as subjugating the subject and makes it clear the subject is split between conscious and unconscious parts of the person's experience. Lacan says, quote, "The subject cannot simply be identified with the speaker or the personal pronoun in a sentence. In French, the énoncé is exactly the sentence, but there are many énoncés where there is no index of him who utters the énoncé. When I say it rains, the subject of the enunciation is not part of the sentence." Unquote. In other words, the subject is the result of language and is implied, even when there is no obvious source of enunciation for it. Lacan once wrote of the subject in the following way: "I am not a poet, but a poem that is being written even if it looks like a subject." Lacan was referring to the way in which our sense of subject exists within a semiotic system, a system of language and symbols. Persons are aware of themselves and express the nature of what they experience in language. Expression of subjective experience is done by language both internally and externally. Some internal experiences seem to be actuated through representations, conceptualizations, and can be experienced through language. Lacan is well known for his expression that the unconscious is, quote, "structured like a language," unquote. It is within the system of language or symbols that the person becomes manifest to themselves and the world around them. Lacan, in saying his experience is a poem being written, demonstrates his understanding of our experience within what he calls the symbolic order. For the most part, a person understands themselves as constancy and permanently represent it to themselves. It is not often a person finds it the case that they are not themselves. However, there are times when one is not oneself, when they feel a sense of something being surreal or not quite real. This may happen when someone has a lot of loss of sleep, or is experiencing extreme anxiety, or even when one is under the influence of a substance like alcohol. This can occur during human development, when magical thinking happens in childhood. Magical thinking occurs when a child imagines themselves in a fictive world and pretends. The child may come to believe this fictional reality is more important than their relationships in the real world. This kind of not quite feeling to be oneself might happen when someone is daydreaming. In another case, a person may behave in ways that are out of character and wonder why they behaved in such a manner. It is through this propensity that fusion can capture the subject. Lacan's notion of the mirror stage is important on this context. In this context, it is during the mirror stage that infants realize autonomy and self-efficacy. The child looks in the mirror and comes to realize the body that they see is coordinated at their own volition. This is the formation of the sense of a person being a unified entity with control of its own body. Two other Lacanian notions that are important to understand are the symbiotic relationship and the name of the father. The symbiotic relationship is a period of strong attachment and identification the infant has with the mother that exists from birth. The relationship with the mother is interrupted by the father's no. At this point, an outside force interferes with symbiosis.